Hi everyone, it's been a little while since I've made a video regarding the culture wars, but I came across a Daily Telegraph piece and it's been more or less copied by GB News regarding the British director Danny Boyle. Um, so during an interview in which he was promoting his new film 28 Years Later, I'm looking forward to that, it's partly filmed in this area. He spoke about Slumdog Millionaire, and he spoke about how it was cultural appropriation and he wouldn't do it today. Although he was proud of the film, he wouldn't do it today. I'll put a link to the article that goes into further details there. But the gist of it is Boyle's view is that times have changed, and today, if he was involved in a sequel in any way, he would get a young Indian film director to make it. Um, I've noticed there's this trajectory of left-wing creative people sort of self-flagellating, if I could put it that way. And I don't really understand it because Slumdog Millionaire is a good movie. It won lots of awards. It's gripping. It's a good movie. I think I had mixed reviews in India, but as far as I could tell, it was it wasn't so much about the cultural appropriation thing. It was and I don't recall that being an issue at the time. There was other criticisms for the format and things like that, but I don't think there was any. I don't think that was a major issue at the time. But I want to speak more broadly about this idea of cultural appropriation because, quite honestly, I think it's nonsense. Um, so there's a contradictory message here. Boyle made the film and he says he's proud of it, but he says it wouldn't be made today and that's the way it should be. Well, you could argue that what is Slumdog Millionaire? It's based on a British TV show who wants to be a millionaire that then became internationalized. It got into an international franchise. So it could be argued that that's culturally appropriating a British show. Um, this is one of the things that bugs me about the notion of cultural appropriation. It's it's always one-sided. It's always perceived to be, let's say it, white people taking on something else. It's never, um, another group or another culture taking on something that may or may not be white culture. But honestly, I'm not even interested in getting into the who owns what argument. I mean, personally, I don't care if people appropriate British culture. In fact, a patriotic side of me would say I'm quite honoured for that. I would say it's nice that people are appreciating our culture. I like the fact that around the world there is interest in Harry Potter, James Bond, etc. Um, and I don't think there's many Britons that are offended by it. I can't really think of any, in fact. Um, and I think that most of the people who complain about cultural appropriation, again, it's this classic case of being offended on behalf of a larger group. Most of them probably aren't offended now. I'm not saying this is across the board. There have been examples where there's been a genuine backlash to something perceived as cultural appropriation. One example recently was the Canadian version of Dragon's Den, I believe. If I'm getting that wrong, apologies. But what happened was a white couple had up a boba tea idea, which originates in Taiwan, and there was a big backlash against their views on this because one of the judges mentioned cultural appropriation. He was an Asian judge. Now, I don't watch the show extensively, so um, I don't, know all the names of individuals involved, but I do know that there was Asians in North America, in the United States and Canada, and some in the Far East complaining about like this white couple taking on boba tea. Um, it may have been there may be more to that, and maybe in the attitude they took or something. But I think that if you get purist about this, if you get into the notion that we can never sort of look at another culture, if we can never use part of another culture in a positive way, then to me it's incredibly narrow. And I found it astonishing coming from creative people like directors, writers, actors, because surely the whole point of being a creative is to explore new ideas and be open minded. And some of that may involve looking at other cultures. Now, I do understand there's certain needs for sensitivity sensitivity. Um, there's certain areas where, yeah, that is required. So, for instance, if you have um, an indigenous group whose numbers are dwindling, and then their culture is being appropriate in a negative way, I can understand why that would be offensive and why it would be inappropriate. But most of what's described as culture appropriation is not cultures that are dying. They're cultures that are very much alive and vibrant, and there's no risk of them vanishing. So I just think it's nonsense. Because if you get purist about it, we all do it. Yet the criticism only seems to be aimed at Western countries and predominantly white people. I've occasionally heard, for example, Asians being accused of culturally appropriating black culture and vice versa, but it is predominantly aimed at white people. But that to me seems to be hypocritical because, you know, is it not therefore cultural appropriation if an Asian person adopts something that's perceived to be a British or American or Canadian cultural thing? But again, I'm not interested in point scoring. I think it's just the concept is overused and nonsense. Um, and it's all very well for Boyle to say this now. I'm sure he was happy to take the awards at the time. And he's a talented guy. I think he's a good director. I just think it's unfortunate he's sort of jumping on this thing. It's a little bit like sensitivity readers, novels. Again, to me, there's something Orwellian about the idea of someone checking that your text is sensitive enough. Now, I think the writers should do their homework. I think they should do the research if they're talking about other cultures. But this is ridiculous. You also see it in the acting world. This notion that actors should only be allowed to play their own people. I think there's certain common sense things. A white actor shouldn't play a historically black character for obvious reasons. I think it should work both ways. And that is not about offending people, it's about just believability. I mean, a historically black figure is black, a historically white figure is white. But again, we see double standards here because when a minority actor takes on a historic figure that was white, that's seen as progress. If a white actor does it, then it's blackface or yellowface. Apologies for the good terminology. That is what is immediately brought up. Um, I think that when it comes to race, that's a very obvious thing. But outside of that, I mean, I've no problem with a straight actor playing a gay role or a gay actor playing a straight role. Why? Because that is not something that's immediately, unless you believe in really over the top gay stereotypes, then surely the most important thing is that the actor brings about the essence of the character as an individual. I think Sean Penn deserved his Oscar for his portrayal of Harvey Milk. We could get into lots of areas with this, but to me, it's this really woke dogmatic thing of you can't culture appropriate. You can't even look at other cultures. Yet you would think the same people would be the first to shout racist if someone said they had no interest in culture outside their own. So it gets rather ridiculous. And like I say, if you look at this in a purist way, you know, we live in a globalized world. It's pretty much impossible not to culturally appropriate something in some way. Chances are you're watching this video on a Chinese made smartphone, um, say in an American coffee shop or a desk made in Sweden. These probably aren't the best examples, but you get my point. We live in a globalized world, and I think trying to be purist about it and saying you can never do that, you can never, it's just ridiculous. I I'm heavily involved in the Ukrainian community here, and there's a number of British people that go and they for example will wear T-shirts with the Ukrainian coat of arms and things like that. I don't have that, but I've got a little lapel badge to show my support. Now, do the Ukrainians find this? Do they talk about culture appropriation? No, they're honoured and they're grateful that people are supporting them in a very difficult time. So I find it refreshing when people look at appreciating other cultures for what it is, rather than just labeling it cultural appropriation. I just don't. I just think the term is overused. I'm not saying it's never valid. I'm not saying there aren't times when um, misusing another culture can be inappropriate. Of course, it can. I mean, for instance, in the case of American football teams having Native American names, I can understand why that would be perceived as inappropriate because the Native Americans involved never had a say in it. But the bigger issue is it's kind of done in stereotypical ways. And I can understand why that's a bit of an issue, but I also think that more broadly, people just want to find reasons to be offended, and it's unfortunate. Um, so you summed up. I don't agree with Danny Boyle. I don't think it's cultural appropriation. I mean, why? He had Indian actors. He had a large Indian cast. It's not like these were stereotypical caricatures of Indians. It was, there's layers to that film. It's a good movie. Um, And if he's proud of it, then why is he contradicting his own success? It doesn't really make sense. Um, okay, so you're proud of it. Well, if you're either proud of it or you're not, how can you be proud of it and then say that, oh, but we shouldn't have done that culture? It doesn't make sense to me. Um, I know there's been times where white actors have taken on roles like, for example, Tom Cruise in The Last Samurai, Keanu Reeves in 47 Ronin, and things like that. Although in the case of Reeves, I believe he does have some Japanese ancestry. He's got very mixed background. Um, so I don't know. I just think that with the creative arts, whether it be film, whether it be literature, there has to be scope for creative people to be flexible without always having to say, will I be accused of cultural appropriation? This idea that only, um, only straight actors can play straight roles and vice versa. And Michael Sheen recently came out and said only Welsh actors play Welsh roles. Really? Well, then you're going to limit the pool a bit. How many Welsh actors are there? There's not going to be thousands and thousands, so there is going to be limits on there was also an outcry over Bradley Cooper playing Leonard Bernstein because apparently they put a bit of prosthetics. Yet Leonard Bernstein's own family approved of the role. So it seems to me that there's people who get offended on behalf of others, which is nonsense. I think creative people should be respectful. I think they should do their homework. Try to get details right. But I strongly, strongly disagree that a white writer or actor or director shouldn't be able to write about or work with other material just because, how boring would the world be if only Chinese people wrote about Chinese topics, only British authors wrote about British topics, etc., etc. I just think it would be very boring and very closed. Um, I mean, it's the opposite of being open-minded, actually. It's just, I don't understand the hyperbole around this. So I'll leave it there. But my challenge to those who constantly throw this term cultural appropriation around is, first of all, look at yourself. Can you honestly say you're not culturally appropriating something? So if you're going to attack others for doing it, then check your own record, and you better make sure it's squeaky clean. Otherwise, you're just a hypocrite. Point one. Point two. It it limits creativity because it limits what material authors, actors, directors can work with. So that's ridiculous. Um, and point three, there are double standards around it. It seemed to only be aimed at, like I say, I don't want to be an identitarian, but it does seem to be predominantly aimed at the West and white creatives rather than others. And I figure, why the double standards? Um, It's nonsense. And here's the other irony about it. Most of the things that are accused of cultural appropriation are positive things. It's celebrations of culture, it isn't mocking culture. More often than not, it's positive. It's not meant to be an offensive thing. Um, I suppose I'll just close on this point. I suppose in the culinary world, if a chef passes something off as authentic and it isn't, that's wrong. They shouldn't do that. So that might be an area where it's like, but I wouldn't even use the word cultural appropriation, and I would just say it's not authentic. I don't see why, if someone respects a culture, if, for instance, if you have um, someone who has spent years and years in Italy, they respect the culture, they've studied the culinary traditions, and they've got years doing it, the chances are they will be more proficient than the regular Italian on the street who isn't necessarily in the culinary business. That's just an example. Um, so that's different from someone who's just messing around, passing something off as something that it isn't. In that situation, I would say the issue is about authenticity more than cultural appropriation. I just think we need to retire this term. It's a nonsense term. It's overused. I respect Danny Boyle as a filmmaker, but I think he's wrong about this. Um, Let me know your thoughts. You might disagree with me. You might think people should just stick with their own culture. I don't happen to agree with that. I think the world's more interesting because of diversity, because there is, so much out there. And I think it should be done in a respectful way. I think creative people should do the research, but it shouldn't be so rigid that the notion of sensitivity readers or shouting cultural appropriation every time um, another culture, it just, this is why the film industry has arguably declined. Occasionally, there are still good movies out there, but I do think, some of the blockbusters we had in the past may not be made today for the reasons that Boyle stated. But instead of endorsing it, he should be, I think it's ridiculous. Let me know your thoughts.